Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing Episode 109, Pokemon Food Fight. The episode begins with Ash and the gang now on Buttwall Island after leaving Ascorbia Island from last episode. They'd been on Buttwall Island for over a week at this point due to being stranded by a severe storm that was sweeping the island. Although it clearly wasn't that severe, as there was no storm clouds in the sky or some shit, it was just affecting the waters, preventing them from leaving. Due to no one likely being able to get off the island, Misty worried that the island would run out of food for them and their Pokemon. Tracy refuted this worry, though, as he pulled out a book to explain to Misty about the island's local plant life, stating that this plant life was okay for Pokemon to eat, so even if they ran out of food, their Pokemon would be okay. Tracy then spots some flowers that were in the book that claimed that these plants were all edible, so he decided to try and pick some to prove his point. However, Tracy then realizes that he wasn't touching flowers, but he was touching a kid. No, not like that. The kid was wearing flowers on his head as an accessory. Anyways, the kid reveals himself, stating that his name was Golzar, and that he was the greatest grass-type trainer in the Orange Islands, and was hiding behind the rock, looking for a trainer to battle, and seeing Tracy try and pull him out, he had found his target. Wanting to battle Tracy, as revenge for him almost ruining the flowers in his head. Tracy tries to apologize, as he obviously wasn't in the mood for a battle right now, but the kid continues to insist. Ash argues back that they were simply trying to find some food, and that was more important, which makes Golzar mad, accusing Ash of wanting to run away from a battle, which he thought was unacceptable. So, he decided to change his target from Tracy, now being more mad at Ash. Ash decides to accept the challenge and put the little shit in his place, and the battle then begins as Golzar sends out his Gloom. Ash scans Gloom on his Pokedex and finds out that it was a grass type, so it was weak against fire and flying types, so Ash decides to send out his Charizard. However, Charizard doesn't come out. Instead, he throws the wrong Pokeball, sending out Squirtle. Although ashamed, he decides to give Squirtle a chance, despite the type disadvantage, and has Squirtle use Water Gun. All the Water Gun ends up doing, though, is refreshing the Gloom. Ash realizes that Squirtle would be unfortunately useless, so he returns him to his Pokeball and tries once again to send out Charizard. However, he throws the wrong Pokeball yet again, releasing Snorlax. And as he did so, to make matters worse, he accidentally threw his Pokeball into a rock, which shattered it. So, not only did Snorlax come out, but it came out of a broken Pokeball, meaning that Ash couldn't recall it when he tried, attempting to fix his mistake. Tracy declares that there was no way Ash could fix his mistake now, with the Pokeball destroyed, so Ash had to suck it up and use Snorlax as his next Pokemon. To make matters worse, when Snorlax came out of its Pokeball, it was instantly sleeping, so Ash couldn't even use it as his next Pokemon if he wanted to, because when he tried to wake it up, Snorlax obviously refused. Ash gets frustrated, as does Golzar, who was tired of fucking waiting for the battle to begin, so he decides to simply order his Gloom to use a Solar Beam, which hits Snorlax, with him unable to do anything to defend itself. However, the Solar Beam also caused Snorlax to roll around, almost rolling into Ash in the process, but thankfully Ash got away. This rolling actually managed to make Snorlax wake up. Wow, I thought it could only be woken up by the fucking Pokeflute. As soon as Snorlax woke up, it immediately went to the Gloom, and Ash thought that this meant that Snorlax was finally going to attack, but he simply just wanted to eat the Gloom, being hungry as fuck as usual. He sniffs it a few times, and then eagerly goes in for the bite, forcing Golzar to retreat Gloom into its Pokeball to avoid it getting absolutely fucking murdered. This ended up just putting Golzar in danger though, as Snorlax was still hungry, and really it didn't care what it was eating, as long as it was eating something, so with Gloom gone, it settled for its next closest target, being Golzar, as it ate the flowers on its head, and Golzar's lunch that his mom had packed him, surprisingly not eating Golzar whole. Golzar was extremely sad and frustrated by both losing his lunch and flowers and not being able to send out his second Pokemon and continue the battle, since immediately after eating, Snorlax went back to sleep. Golzar gets so frustrated to the point where he starts crying and complains that he was going to go back home to his mama, trying to threaten Ash that he would come back with a vengeance. However, Ash wasn't intimidated at all, and instead asked Golzar if he knew where a Pokemon Center was so that Ash could get Snorlax's Pokeball repaired. That was his primary concern at this point, since he couldn't return Snorlax after the battle and didn't want to leave him laying there forever, obviously. Thankfully for Ash, despite Golzar's anger, he still points him in the direction of a Pokemon Center, stating that there was one just over a nearby hill. He did this likely because he was scared that Snorlax would eventually wake up and try and eat him. Golzar then takes his leave, as Ash and the gang prepare to leave for the Pokemon Center. However, they then realize that they had a problem on their hands, being how the fuck they were going to get Snorlax to the Pokemon Center in the first place if Ash couldn't carry him in a Pokeball. They debate what they should do, when eventually they come up with a plan to drag Snorlax to the Pokemon Center by putting some logs on the ground and rolling Snorlax across them on rollers. The logs essentially acting as train tracks, if you could view Snorlax as a train, and technically it was about as heavy. Eventually, this method is revealed to not work though, as Ash and the gang get very, very fucking exhausted from having to haul around 1,000-pound Pokemon or however much this fuck weighed. Forced to come up with a new solution, Tracy eventually does, as he pulls an apple out of his backpack, revealing his plan to essentially lure the Snorlax to the Pokemon Center by using food. Tracy proceeded to hold the apple up in front of Snorlax's face, with the intention that Snorlax would notice, and then Tracy would go running off, and Snorlax would then follow him, wanting to eat the apple. But as soon as Tracy puts the apple in front of his face, it just causes Snorlax to wake up in excitement, and immediately wharf down the apple, without having to get up. So Tracy's plan managed to wake Snorlax, but it didn't motivate him to move at all. And to make matters worse, with Snorlax being done eating and seeing nothing else to do, it immediately fell back to sleep, rendering Tracy's plan now entirely useless, much to Tracy's dismay. Thankfully, Misty then gets another idea though that was closely related to Tracy's apple plan, but using a lure instead of bait. Tracy initially questioned what she meant by this, but then realized that she meant that they could have Ash dress up as an apple and have Ash run around and run down the hill, essentially causing the Snorlax to chase him because it wanted the food so bad, stating that Ash was like a fisherman lure, as opposed to bait. Tracy agreed with this plan due to realizing that if Snorlax thought that there was food in front of it, it would follow it no matter what. So if Ash was able to keep his ass moving, then he would be able to trail the Snorlax to the Pokemon Center before it could try and eat him. Ash was obviously initially opposed to putting himself at risk in fear that his Snorlax would eat him, but he eventually cooperated, getting into an apple suit, cosplaying as an apple, causing Tracy and Misty to laugh at how ridiculous the costume was. Ash quickly told them to shut the fuck up, though, as he was only doing this because he cared for his Snorlax being his Pokemon, and he felt responsible. So Tracy quits laughing and pokes Snorlax's face with a stick, which successfully manages to wake him up somehow, and Snorlax immediately spots Ash and begins chasing him, and Ash leads the Snorlax all the way up the hill, with Tracy not concerned for Ash's safety at all, simply stating how fast Snorlax was going, despite being a fat bitch. Thankfully for Ash, though, despite Snorlax's speed, Ash was still able to stay ahead and not get eaten as he led Snorlax uphill, but that was until he tripped on a rock, of course, allowing the Snorlax to catch up with him and try and take a bite of his apple costume, only to then discover that it of course, was a fake apple. This bores it, because, it didn't have any food, being the fat bitch that it was. It wanted food, so it fell back to sleep in boredom as Tracy and Misty caught up with Ash and congratulate Ash. Ash is confused because Snorlax just fucking went back to sleep. What was so good about that? But then he realized that due to tripping on the rock, he didn't even realize that he had managed to get Snorlax completely uphill. However, their journey wasn't done yet though, as this was only halfway. Now that they got Snorlax up the hill, they needed to get it down to the Pokemon Center. Conveniently for Ash and the gang though, they then spot a river that also flowed downhill. So they could simply just build a little log raft, put Snorlax on it, and then paddle the raft down the hill. They proceeded to do this, but as soon as they got on the water, they were met with both rapids and a huge waterfall approaching. They were unable to avoid the waterfall, just barely managing to get past the rapids and fall down. When they do, they immediately fall off their raft and are floating in the water, immediately panicking, believing that they're drowning. But then, Gulzar comes up to them, hearing their screams for help, and is like, yo, what the fuck are you guys talking about? We're only in a river here, not the ocean. You can just stand up and you'll be fine. It's shallow water. And Ash and the gang shamefully realized this, standing up. It was only fucking knee-high. Gulzar then points Ash and the gang in direction of the Pokemon Center, revealing that they had made it. The Pokemon Center was right on the edge of the river. Since there was only a few feet left to travel, Ash and the gang climb up to the nearby rocks that were the path adjacent to the river, and use the log method that they used at the beginning, where they towed Snorlax. And since they only had to do this for a few feet, they're able to get him to the Pokemon Center. But before they can go in, they're blocked by an angry crowd of people. Ash and the gang question why the people were so angry, with Gulzar revealing that they were angry because the recent shipment of supplies that was supposed to come in today was delayed due to the storm. Ash and the gang were shocked that the island actually got supply drops, as the entire reason that they went out to get some food for their Pokemon was because they thought that there would be no food coming in. So they essentially had made Snorlax fall asleep for absolutely no reason. Gulzar's like, dude, why the fuck did you think that we had no food coming in? How else do you think that we survived? Ash and the gang rebuttal that they hadn't spotted a airport or cargo bay on the island, so they assumed that there was no way that food could get there. But Gulzar was just like, dude, that's why they airdrop us the supplies from a plane. A plane just flies overhead, and boom. Anyways, Ash and the gang and Gulzar are cut off by Nurse Joy, who comes out of the Pokemon Center due to seeing how angry everyone was that the shipment was seemingly not coming, and she informs them that it was in fact on its way, it was just a little delayed, adding that the shipment was coming from Valencia Island, the island where Professor Ivy and Brock currently were. Relieved that the shipment was still on its way, despite the storm, the crowd begins to cheer, and as if on cue, the plane then shows up and airdrops the shipment. Yay! However, not always happy, as Team Rocket was spying on the shipment being dropped and intended to steal it for their own purposes, which Meowth did by grabbing it with an extendable claw in his new mech that he had built, known as the Mecha Meowthinator. The hook intercepts the shipment midair and pulls it towards Team Rocket, causing Ash and the gang and all of the island folk to run after it, desperate for some supplies. However, Team Rocket then reveal themselves, and have Meowth safeguard the supply drop, while they do their motto, revealing that everyone coming after the supplies was all part of their plan. They didn't want the supplies, no. They wanted to use the supplies as a ransom in order to demand that Ash give them Pikachu. Essentially, they would give back the supplies if Ash gave back Pikachu. Ash, of course, refused this, as did Tracy and Misty, although they needed a bit of convincing, as they were fucking hungry. And unfortunately, the island folk weren't able to be convinced as easily. They simply wanted Ash to hand over Pikachu so they could satisfy their hunger. They try to force Ash to give up Pikachu to Team Rocket, but thankfully, Gulzar gets in the way and stands up for Ash, stating that all of the island folk should be ashamed for being willing to sacrifice a trainer's Pokemon, all for some food. Ash and the gang are initially confused as to why Gulzar was suddenly being so nice to them, with Misty realizing that it must be because Gulzar really cared for Pokemon. Gulzar's little spiel managed to convince the crowd a little bit, so now Pikachu was not in danger of being handed over. This leads Meowth to then come up with another plan to get Pikachu, stating that he and Pikachu would battle, and if he managed to beat Pikachu, then Team Rocket would get Pikachu and get to keep the shipment of food, but if Pikachu won, then they would hand over the shipment of food. Ash accepts, still wanting to help the island folk and get some food for himself as well. But, of course, Meowth only suggested this as he knew that he would likely win due to having his mech suit. His mech suit also happened to be immune to Pikachu's electricity, as when Pikachu tried to shock him with Thunderbolt, it was immediately absorbed, much to Ash's dismay. With Pikachu unable to do anything, Meowth takes the opportunity to attack with the mechanized robot's spinning claws, which resembled Fury Swipes, so he called this attack Power Swipes. The claws swipe at Pikachu so much that it forces Pikachu to run away, and he manages to get away, since Meowth only manages to swipe at rocks, running into Ash's arms, although Ash and Pikachu are soon cornered by Meowth and his robot. Since Ash was caught off guard when Pikachu jumped into his arms suddenly, so he wasn't able to react before Meowth could come up to him. A desperate Ash tries to convince Meowth to stop, claiming that he didn't know that Meowth's mech had mechanized claws on it, and that meant that the deal that they made was unfair, so Team Rocket should still not take away Pikachu. However, Meowth wasn't willing to listen, and was about to grab Pikachu with his mech's arm when suddenly Snorlax arrived. It had woken up and was angry, since all of the ruckus between Pikachu and Meowth had woken it up, and it was because of this that Snorlax wanted to take out its anger on Meowth. Meowth tries to attack first, utilizing his power claws. However, Snorlax is able to dodge every single hit. As Snorlax keeps dodging, he leads Meowth to a rock and then jumps out of the way right as Meowth swipes, causing Meowth's claw to get stuck in the rock and break off, so now he had no attacking claws. This leads Meowth to try something else, being a mechanized Skull Bash attack, which he does by pressing a button that detaches the mech's head and sends it flying at Snorlax. However, the head simply bounces off Snorlax's fat body and does absolutely no damage, meaning that the mech was now just left headless. Meowth then saw a button on his mech that said Mechanized Body Slam, and pressed it, thinking that it meant the mech was going to slam down on Snorlax, but it actually just sent him flying out of the mech. Meowth not knowing this, likely due to James designing that part of the mech. But anyways, when Meowth gets launched out, all he ends up doing is bouncing right off Snorlax's fat-ass belly, just like the mech head did, and the bounce causes him to be launched back into Team Rocket, knocking the three of them into the water. This wasn't good enough for Snorlax, though, so it began to charge up and attack inside of its mouth, with Tracy realizing that this was Hyper Beam. Snorlax proceeded to fire off the Hyper Beam, sending Team Rocket blasting off. Ash goes to hug Snorlax as a reward for doing so good. However, when he thinks that Snorlax is rushing towards him to hug him back, Snorlax runs immediately past him and to the shipment of food and devours it all. Thankfully, the island crowd isn't that angry, as Snorlax had just saved them from Team Rocket's rampage, and they felt he deserved a reward. Ash, on the other hand, was crushed though. Not literally, but he just wanted to give Snorlax a hug, you know? Snorlax then falls asleep yet again immediately after eating, but thankfully, Ash and the gang wouldn't have to haul him down this time, as Ash gives the broken Pokeball to Nurse Joy, and she's able to fix it, so Ash is able to recall Snorlax back into his Pokeball. Now having respect for Ash, due to seeing how hard he defended his Pikachu, Golzar shakes Ash's hand, saying that he was sorry for initially thinking that Ash was a bad trainer who simply wanted to run away from battle. Ash accepts the apology, and it's revealed that the storm had now cleared, so Ash and the gang could finally get off Buttwall Island and continue their journey, which they did as they said goodbye to Golzar, Nurse Joy, and all the island folk.